Good morning, good afternoon, or maybe it's even good evening for you. Hey, this is Jordan, and we are happy that you're here with another episode of Jordan's Famous Friends. Today, I have the pleasure of sitting down with my dear friend, Mark Artrip, somebody who I've admired for a long time. Mark's been a dear friend for, years, and he is doing some big things over in Ohio in regards to pastoring and just leading in general. If you go to Mark Artrip's Facebook page, he will say that he's a follower of Jesus, husband to Kristin, dad to Malachi, Canaan, Mercy, and Zion, and also the lead pastor of Movement Church. So Mark Artrip, man, thanks for joining me today.
Good to be here. Good to be hanging out. I got nervous when you were talking about how long we've known each other because I was afraid you were going to say like 3 decades or something. And I was like, are we that old? But I don't think it's that bad.
Sometimes it's better to just like be really broad with people so
Yeah.
that you
Yeah.
don't have you don't have to
Yeah.
worry about it.
We've been friends for a long time. Just leave it
Yeah,
alone.
we have been friends long enough to where you have kids that are in high school. Let's just say that. And when we
Yeah.
started, we didn't have any kids,
Yeah.
so
And you knew me when I had a full head of hair. So
it's kind of
sort of.
true.
Sort of. Yeah.
Hey man, so yeah, glad that you're here. We started out with just kind of getting people to see or hear how you got to where you are in life. So we asked for like kind of the condensed or Cliff Notes version of that. I know that you've achieved a lot, specifically in the last probably 10 years of your life. I know that there's more than that too, but take us back, share just kind of how you got to this point in your life. Like, what were some of those pivotal moments or decisions that shaped you to where you're at right now? And if you want to, you can kind of put in like what you do and for in Ohio.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you mentioned that I'm a husband and a dad and a pastor, and so that's probably the bullet points of the bio. But I grew up Northeast Ohio, and I like to tell people I grew up in a cornfield, a place where the county fair is the exciting thing that happens every year. Little 4-way stop town close to Worcester, Ohio. Grew up in a Christian family. My parents, we were rooted in the local church, and they loved the local church, and so I grew up, that was kind of my social life, my friends. I mean, I was active in school, but I always loved the local church. And so when I got to my teenage years and started, just weighing calling and what it really meant to have my own faith, I think a lot of things started to click for me. I would have grown up, gave my life to Jesus at a young age, got baptized at a young age, but I think around 14, I started to understand like, hey, this isn't just my parents' faith. I should be reading the Bible myself, And so as I dove into my faith more, and I basically started to think about being a pastor. I had a youth pastor that I just thought was a rock star. It wasn't idolatry worship, but it might have been close, And
It was that era, right? I mean,
yeah. Yeah. It was like that like 94 to 2000 era where you're like, youth pastors are so cool. They have goatees, and we all want to be them. And so
people are starting to put together our age. They're like, wait a second.
Yeah, exactly. I'm 26. Yeah. So it's basically, growing up in the church, and I just came to a point where I thought, man, I think it'd be cool to be in ministry. And I went on a summer trip, and I actually met my wife on that trip, and I met some friends on that trip, and just kind of finally decided, hey, I want to be in ministry. And so went on to Grace College and seminary, and eventually married my wife, and moved here to Columbus. And we kind of always knew, it wasn't if we were going to plant a church, but when. And so I was a student pastor for 7 years, but eventually we moved over here to the west side of Columbus and started planting a church. And in some ways it felt like I'd been preparing for that, since I was 17. Like that was kind of the plan all along and the thing I wanted to do. And so, how did I get to this point in my life, I guess, was a question. I mean, I think when I think of just people that had it really well the day they were born, I had 2 solid parents, just great people, like people of character, people that love local church, people that raised me probably to be a little too confident and told me I was loved and told me I loved Jesus. And so a great family, a great home church, some great mentors, and a great wife. And along the way, the grace of God. So we're here on the west side of Columbus, been, planting a church and starting churches out of our church for about 10 years here. So,
which is crazy because this is really hard for me not to go like on a deep dive into this question because, there's so many other ones that we want to get to, but because we could talk for an hour just about like your journey in regards to what's happening and transpiring at Movement. But you, to me, are the definition of small incremental steps lead to massive growth. Because when you first started, you've been at Movement for how long?
12 years, 12, 13 years going on. So.
I mean, and you started with a small group of people, and now like you just built like a building.
Yeah. We just moved in. We were in a YMCA for 10 years, and people are always like, "You guys gonna get a building? You gonna get a building?" And we just thought it was more important to, establish the DNA that we wanted to plant churches. So yeah, we had planted 2 churches out of our church before we ever did a capital campaign, and yeah, that's kind of backwards to what a lot of people would think you should do.
When I saw you guys break ground for your church, I thought, are you sure?
Yeah. Well, exactly. But we got kicked out of that YMCA during COVID. And so we saw some of the weird signs of like, hey, churches have buildings for reasons. You can actually meet in them.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy how that works.
Yeah.
But it's so much of a, like, your life is very much like investing in very small things, which is why I would call you one of my famous friends, is because a dear mentor and friend of mine said a long time ago, it's amazing what you can't do in 5 years, but what you can do in 1, or it might be that I might have had that backwards. Anyway, what he's saying is those small, like simple steps, lead to this big growth. So yeah, it's been kind of cool to see the walls go up literally in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
And then also, people probably don't know, but like 2 of your kids are biological, 2 of your kids are adopted. So you guys have done that, like just investing, putting chips into specific spots and areas, saying we're in it for the long haul. And I mean, with that said, like, do you see yourself like ever leaving Movement, or do you think you'll, kind of die with the congregation there? If that's possible. That sounds so bad. I apologize for that in advance.
No, you're fine. No, it's a great question, because you do see a lot of people that are gifted entrepreneurially, and then they, kind of move on, or maybe they're not meant to shepherd long term. I hope, if I think my gifting is matching that, I would hope to be here for a very long time. I think one of the things that we've been able to do is kind of make a wake for other church planners that come after us. So I think, the way that we're able to fundraise and help them get started is I'm able to do that because we're in an established seasoned church now. And I think that would be tough to do from another spot, and I don't want to move my family all over and keep planning and planning. I respect that, but I know that would be a lot for my kids. And so, yeah, I hope to be here. We chose the name Movement for a reason. Like, I hope to look back at the end of my life and be like, hey, there's 25 churches out of the wake of that movement that God made. Yeah. So we'll see if it happens, but that's the goal.
Okay, so with all that said, I mean, it's obvious you have lots of influences in regards to background, upbringing, stuff like that. Books often play a profound impact in our lives, and if ever I talk to a pastor, the Bible is excluded from this. All right, so this is not a part of the list. So moving into books, are there any books, authors, could be a book or an author, that have significantly influenced you or played a role in shaping where you're at and your path?
Yeah. Well, I remember the first time one of my mentors took me through a book called Experiencing God, and I was still in high school, so that wasn't a book that I had on the radar. I was just a kid that was trying to play soccer. That was the first time I think I kind of went through like a structured discipleship thing where I'm like, man, this book is teaching me exactly what it says, what it means to experience God. I think some other ones. I had a college mentor, a guy well, TK. Timothy Kurtanik took me through the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership by John Maxwell early in college, and that book shook me. I think I'd probably always been gifted as a leader, but sometimes you don't have language for leadership, and that book just helped me a lot in knowing what it's like to steward a gift. I think probably some more spiritual books. There's a book called Celebration of Discipline by Jim Foster. That I read in seminary, and it was the first time I liked a book that I read in college or seminary in classes, where it actually felt like, hey, this is helping me run after Jesus, and this is good. And then a couple others. I mean, there's some famous ones, but I remember the first time I read Crazy Love by Francis Chan. Different language, different imagery. That book shaped me. And then probably recently a book that I think, has really helped a lot of people in our church, myself included, great encouragement. John Mark Comer has a book, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry.
So good.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that was a book. That was one of those books. A friend gave it to me. I read it. I gave it to my wife. We bought it for everyone we knew. We bought it for our staff. We bought it for their wives. And it just kind of, that book's not rocket science, but I think it does a good job of still being based in scripture and highlighting, hey, here's what it looks like to walk after Jesus. Here's what it looks like to rest and Sabbath. And those are some things that I needed to hear in this phase of life and be reminded of.
It is hard for me, like when I'm talking to people, especially on the podcast, to not put in like my 2 cents, because this is not me. This is like what you have. But the ruthless elimination of hurry is so good. I mean,
it's a top fiver. I'm offended if people read it and don't like it. I'm personally offended.
It's just, it's one of those books where, because the top 4 books that you just said, and then you said the ruthless elimination of hurry, but like those 4 are fairly older, and so those will withstand the test of time. I think that book could withstand a lot of seasons, but that's just me. So
can I say a really shallow book too?
Oh yeah, you can do whatever you want. Yeah.
Bill Simmons is a guy that used to write for ESPN. He has a book called The Book of Basketball, and it's basically like a Bible for the NBA on a very shallow level. When I don't want to think about things that matter for eternity, I like to read the Book of Basketball, and I like Bill Simmons in the NBA. So
have you read the shoe book yet? It's like
Nike one.
Yeah.
On Phil Knight?
Yeah.
No, I actually haven't. I need Shoe Dog, is it?
Shoe Dog, yeah.
That's, no, I haven't read that. I need to. I watched the movie, but that's the cheap version.
A memoir of the creator of Nike by Phil Knight. Yeah, it's a really interesting read for sure. All right. You, Mark, are one of those people who I feel always have like a purchase that kind of shifts you a little bit. What I mean by that is Mark, this is an audio podcast, but for those of you who don't know, Mark's a very well-dressed man. Not like suits and ties. So it's just more, you're very put together. Let's say that.
Okay.
So it could be clothing, but I'm always interested in the little things that make like a really big difference. So could you share with us a purchase, or it could be an investment that you've made recently that's had a surprisingly positive impact on your life? Could be product, service, experience, something like that.
Yeah, this one's going to sound weird, and I appreciate you saying I'm put together. I don't know if I am, but this is probably going to make me sound more put together than I am. I had a friend the other day tell me about this new product he bought on the TikTok store, which I had certainly
There's a TikTok store? I didn't even know that's a thing.
Exactly, and it's an AI recorder called Plaud, Plaud, like basically the end of applaud, but just Plaud. And it magnetizes to the back of your phone. You can record messages or any meeting you're in, and it will summarize the meeting you're in with notes, bullet points, a summary, a transcript. Like it is, if you're someone that's talking to people or doing sales calls or elder meetings or whatever, you can just have this thing record, and it will make it look like you have a personal assistant that you're paying $50,000 a year who's amazing. This is so random. Anyway, that's my new toy that I'm trying to figure out. I'm having trouble as an older guy figuring out all the times, like basically I should be recording all the time,
Right.
I've never had a personal assistant. And so I have to think like, hey, what are even the applications I can use this thing in? But it was like $100 and it was pretty awesome.
Have you actually used it? Tried it out? Like, does it work?
Yeah. I've used it in multiple meetings.
Do you feel like you're cheating?
Well, if I was doing it, I'm trying to think. There'd probably be some applications where I thought I was cheating, but taking notes at an elders meeting and formatting those notes does not feel like a matter of integrity. You know what I mean? It just feels like one of those things that, sometimes I feel the pressure where I'm like, man, I got to write a message, but I'm also kind of the unofficial secretary of the elders meetings, and so, I don't feel cheating in that. It's just recording me talking and making my life better. So I greatly appreciate that little toy.
That is interesting. Anything else?
Man, nothing life shattering. Probably one of the best purchases I made recently. You knew me as a truck guy in college, and then when I entered into the world of being a poor pastor, I had to drive a car again. I'm old enough now that I finally got an old truck again, and it is. This doesn't matter for other people, but I'm blown away how much happier I am and just being me
in a truck.
In a truck, like it is. I tell my wife it's like the mental health mobile. Like I don't. It's not like I used to get in my Ford Taurus or Ford Fusion and be like, oh, I'm depressed. But now when I get in that truck and I'm like full of life, I realize, man, maybe I was depressed all those years I was driving a car. So I would always, you see these guys in like an F-350 gas guzzler, and you're like, oh, he must have too much money. And now I'm like, no, he's just taking care of his mental health.
You need a bumper sticker. You need to start making bumper stickers that say, I'm working on my mental health by driving my truck.
Yeah,
What is
true.
it? Is it F-150?
It's a 2013 F-150. Yeah, it's nothing special, but I hadn't had a truck since the 2 months before I got married 20 years ago. And so it is just like, I get in that thing every morning and I'm like, God is good, like God is good if I don't have a truck, but it sure reminds me every day. I'm just like, life's good. And I feel 17 again and I'm happy,
That's so funny. You're a little higher too. Like when you drive a truck, like there's just something about being up over people.
It helps me. It helps me look down on people, which is something I like to do.
Have you ever like passed like an older truck that's like no bed in it? It's like really short, like the really short ones, and they're like from 80s or something. They're so small. Like they used to be these huge. Like now we have these huge trucks, and you're like, I could run you over.
Yeah, mine's like the 4-door super cab kind of thing. I can get my whole family in it. And so, yeah, it is like it's so long. And I'm like, dang, my truck's gigantic.
But it brings you joy,
It does.
It's the little things. That's all good. All right. So being a church planner, being in that kind of shifting back a gear, if you will, we learn a lot from failure. It's often like a stepping stone to success. Tell us about a time when you faced failure, or maybe it was a setback, and how you overcame it, or what you learned from that experience to kind of set you up to move forward in where you're at.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess specifically in church planning, one of the things that people always told me getting into church planning, they would always say, the biggest mistake church planners make is empowering people too early. Church planners are always just grasping for straws and trying to find warm bodies. And, so people would always say, oh, be careful when you put people in leadership, and be careful when you put a title on someone. And I knew that and tried to be wary of that. But I think I've probably made several mistakes, probably all along the way, every couple of years, with whether that's putting someone in a staff role or a leadership role or or an unpaid volunteer role with a title or something. And sometimes I think I try to be conscious of that, but I think there's also a reality. You have to empower people that are where you are. It sounds great to be like, hey, I'm going to wait till I naturally have 5 John Pipers at my church, but maybe you don't when you've only got 30 people at your church. And so there have been multiple times where we had to go to people and say, hey, I've just tried to be honest with them and say, hey, I think this role might be, entering a place where it's outside of your gifts or your wheelhouse. I think maybe the role's outgrown you. I think you'd be better in this space, or I think, your season here is done. And it's not been a contentious thing all the time, but I think I'm hesitant to even call it a mistake, but obviously it probably is, empowering people and putting them in spots where they shouldn't be in. But I think the true mistake would be not being honest with them when you're aware that has happened. And so I think the thing I've learned is just, people that I'm leading, I want to have a constant dialogue with them and have an open relationship where it's like, hey, are you happy in this role? Do you want to be in this role? Are you stressed out? I've had people, when I've asked them to switch roles, they're like, oh, thank goodness I didn't have the courage to bring it up to you, And so I think the true, the failure would have been to not have a relationship or not have a dialogue where you could say, hey, it's a new season. It's time to move on, or time to switch things up.
When you sit and have a conversation with somebody like that, do you ever feel like, is it always the same, or does it change? Like, is it person dependent, or is it person dependent? Probably is not the right word. Like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I think there's little nuances that change with the person, but I think you're basically, kind of doing the compliment, confront, compliment sandwich thing, and it's not that it's mean or contentious, but it's like, hey, want to have a conversation with you. My friend Keith Manier is really good at this. He talks about this all the time, about having difficult conversations and, kind of laying the foundation for that. You might look at me different after this conversation, or this could change things. But I have some things I care about you and I care about our organization. I promised you I'd be honest, and I want to say, and you can say, you've been faithful, you've done a wonderful job, but things are going to change here. I'm asking you to make a shift. And so I think you kind of do have that same difficult conversation framework where, you've got to eventually pull the trigger. And someone might say like, oh, thank goodness you pulled the trigger, but they could almost say that guy tried to shoot me,
Right,
and
right.
so yeah, I think eventually you're following a framework that's pretty standard for conversations that are not common, but you have to have in leadership.
Did you feel like you caught that, or it was taught to you? Like, did somebody do that to you, look at you and say like, hey, Mark, you're failing in this area, and then
Yeah,
here's the direction or trajectory we need to go?
I probably caught it from some leaders, but I also think I failed at it. I mean, I'm probably not a guy. I was literally voted in high school class and stuff most fun to hang out with. Like I
Which was
I, I
5 years
want
ago.
people. Well, yeah, exactly. Because I'm 21. No, uh, I want people to like me, and so it's tough to say difficult things. And I think in the past, where I would fail is I would half say that I'm like, hey, so maybe your time here with us is done. It's like, wait, am I fired? Am I transitioned or not? Like, what are you saying? And so I've had to learn through feedback of even trying to have those conversations. I need to be clear. I need to be gracious to them, but I need to be clear and kind of state the path forward and where we're going. And so yeah, I've had to grow in that for sure. I have some mentors that were great at it, but I am naturally not great at difficult conversations because I'm just a friend to everybody, probably to a fault sometimes.
Does your stomach start to hurt when you have to have them?
Well, yeah, you just think about it, where it's like, oh man, what am I gonna say? And yeah.
You're like way more nervous than they are because you're sitting there
Yeah.
like, this is
And
not.
that's what's funny. I've found most people are like, yeah, I've felt that. That's cool. I appreciate you being honest. And I'm like, gosh, why did I think that was a big deal? There's tension from when someone's not in a role where they're thriving and they're outside of their gifting, and they realize that. And I think one of the things, sometimes we're trying to put people that are evangelists in these shepherd roles, and they feel the wheels spinning too. So it's like let's let people run in the lane that God made them for.
Yeah. And you're right. It feels like they know when you have that conversation. If they were to be honest with themselves, they know
Yeah.
exactly, what you're saying is true, which is just tough. So you obviously speak into people's lives a lot, which is great. Do you have like a go-to message that you constantly go back to? So I tell people a lot, I should probably ask your wife because you say the same things on repeat. We hear ourselves, or we don't hear ourselves, but other people hear us, and they're like, you always say this.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
Do you have like a go-to message, kind of that one thing that is always you're coming back to, either that you try to live by or that you're trying to impart to other people?
Yeah, I mean, I thought of a couple things as you said that. Not to be the stereotypical pastor, but I think that the thing I end up passing on to people, is a form of the gospel, but a little different at least. When I'm talking to people struggling in relationships and going through divorce, I love the quote that peace is only found one place, and it's the person of Jesus. That I think even sometimes as Christians, we try to, find a lot of peace in good things like, oh, I have a solid family and everyone respects us and we have it together. And it's like, well, I lived that life growing up. I'm from a great Christian family, but things will happen in your family that don't bring you peace, and things happen in your career, and things happen with your finances. And so that's something I try to always point people to, whether, I coach soccer, and people will be like, "Oh, can I play college soccer someday?" I'm like, "You can, but it's not going to bring peace to your heart."
Mm,
There's a lot of things in a lot of areas of life that you can be successful and good, and they don't bring you peace. So that's probably one. I think another quote I've always loved is just when I'm angry at another person, it's often because I have too high a view of myself. And so, it's one thing to say like, oh, I want to be humble, but it's another thing to remember, most people are just doing the best they can with the information or the maturity or the mental health they have. And so rather than me judging them, it's just good to think like, but for the grace of God, I could be in the same spot, and, only by the grace of God am I in the spot I'm in. So try to remember that as I approach people and love people.
I believe that's called empathy.
I believe it is. I believe it is.
Do you find yourself being pretty empathetic with people, or is that a struggle?
It's both, and I mean, I think in our own thoughts we're all, we always think we're right and we're all arrogant, but I think if my wife was here, she always laughs and says like, man, I don't understand how you can be pastoral in some of these moments, or
Mm,
you step in that mode. And so I think there's a certain gifting there. I think I can have some empathy, and I think my parents modeled that well, and maybe taught that to me. And so it probably comes, I'm aware of my flaws, but I think some people are they would say it's a gift. They would say they're like, at least you got more empathy than the average jerk.
Right. You have any other quotes that you live by? Like you mentioned a couple of them, but any other ones like come to mind? Some people know them, some
Yeah.
people don't.
Man, there are, a couple of weird ones. My dad was a guy that always said the same things over and over. So when you're talking about like, oh, what would people say? My dad had some quotes. They're kind of funny, like looking back, but he would always say these things to the car. Like we'd be driving home from Dairy Queen, and my mom would be like, boys, tell dad thanks for the ice cream. He'd be like, thanks, dad, and he would say like, hey, everything we have is a gift from God, and I remember being like a 12-year-old and being like, wow, that's so dumb. Just accept the thanks. We got ice cream.
Yeah.
And then as I get older, I'm like, no, man, he's right. Like everything we have is a gift from God. Like even an ice cream cone on a Tuesday night in July,
Do you
like
find
that's
yourself
a
doing
gift
that with
from
the
God.
kids? Like you do that with your kids?
Yeah. Yeah. I think everything I am as a parent, everything I am as a dad is just me, in a good way, coming out of the privilege of having a great dad and a great family and just repeating. I wish I could say like, I'm doing it because I read my Bible, but it's like, man, there's a lot of stuff I'm doing just because my dad did, and it comes natural. So yeah, he had these quotes. He'd say that one, like, we'd be literally like riding in our family van, and he would say like, boys, when you're looking for a wife someday, make sure she loves Jesus. And he would say that like, you know, every 3 days, my whole life. We'd just be riding in the car, and I'm like, what? You're like, well, of course. But it is funny, like, just as you get down the road, you're like, yeah, man, you talk about things that have shaped my life. Like my wife loves Jesus, and because of that, she knows how to love me, and even in spite of my faults, and show me grace. And so I'm like, I think he was just aware, that he lucked into finding my mom, and he was aware that changed, his life and his family and his legacy, and so he was passing that on. And he'd talk about parenting and all kinds of stuff. Another thing my dad would say, he'd always say, some of the nicest people make the worst parents, and so he'd say like, your job isn't to be friends with your kids, it's to be a parent. They'll have a lot of friends in their life, and so he would just say these things as we're like riding in the car, but they've kind of stuck with me. And yeah, I do find myself passing them on.
I totally can relate to that. My dad he has like all these like really weird jokes, and I'll catch myself saying it to kids, and I'm
Yeah.
like, why did I do that? And they
Yeah.
still get a
Yeah.
kick out of it. Like they laugh.
Yeah.
The other thing
Yeah.
is when you're saying like the quotes from your dad, which really resonates, is it's amazing how many things aren't like clever or crafty 140 characters or less quotes. They're these little things that just like are slivers of information that are really beneficial to your life.
Yeah.
Which is crazy to me because I think sometimes we're like, we want to quote this guy or that guy or from this book or that book or whatever the case is. And really, it was just one sentence, that was
Yeah.
really concise and had an impact because it was said over and over again, for sure.
Yeah. What? Yeah. And I meet with couples all the time, marriage counseling, premarital counseling, and I'll put some Ron Artrip quotes in there. And sometimes they'll say, who's Ron Artrip? And I'm like, oh, that's my dad.
Yeah. Is he still around?
He's around. He just turned 76 on Memorial Day. So he's a retired teacher, just living the dream, riding his 1964 Cushman all over Wayne County,
Nothing
Ohio.
wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. That's weird. Our dads are the same age. Wow,
Yeah.
that's crazy. Going back to investments. Investments can come in many forms. You have money, time, energy, things like that. Share with us one of the best or most worthwhile investments you've ever made in your life. It could be an investment that's kind of made an impact on your personal, or it could be professional too, as well. Just whatever you kind of road you want to travel down.
Well, man, I kind of alluded to this, but when I was 17, I thought God was calling me into ministry, and I kind of wanted to chase that down. And so I went on a ministry training trip, and I honestly, I think it impacted me in more ways than I could ever have fathomed. I mean, to accidentally meet your wife on that trip, you talk about something that greatly impacted my life. That's huge, down to my everyday function, my ministry career, my family, my kids, but I think more importantly than that, being able to clarify my call of going into ministry. I think, as a 17-year-old, to finally get to a space where I'm like, man, I'm not perfect, and we'll see what this looks like, but I think God wants me in vocational ministry. That's the specific call. I learned a ministry mindset. I think even some of the things you're talking about with empathy and knowing how to approach people and knowing how to serve people. That was the first place I really saw ministry outside of my local church context, and so I understood church planning because I got to see that. Made some friendships of guys that are still in my life and were in my wedding, and so that was an investment in high school, to go away from home and say, all right, I'm going to figure this ministry thing out and figure out what God wants me to do long term. But I think in hindsight, I look at the trajectory of my life, and that summer has impacted every minute since then. Even down to where I went to college and what my major was and what I did at seminary, and some pretty major stuff.
Does that make you nervous, like sending your kids to places like that? Like,
Well, it makes me nervous because, things like that don't exist anymore. Like, no one's going on 7-week missions trips. Missions
right,
trips.
right, right.
And so, yeah, I'm trying to figure out what is the modern equivalent, because I don't know that any of my kids will end up in vocational ministry, and that's fine. My oldest son wants to be an engineer, and he's going to be a really good engineer. And my second son wants to be in marketing, and my girls are intrigued by medicine. And so, yeah, I think, like, what's the thing that helps them clarify, this is how God made me, and this is the mission he's put in front of me, and this is how I can run hard toward that mission. That's really what I want to figure out. And I think it's cool to look around our church, though, and you can see them gravitating to certain people and certain mentors. And so it's just, maybe putting them in relationships with those people, but figuring out, yeah, what does it mean to know where God's calling me later in life.
That is interesting to think about, that those avenues, for lack of a better word, are very scarce in today's society, because they were so prevalent 10, 15, 20 years ago. And now, like, even sometimes I think about that in regards to facilitators. Like, we're now in that category, or people that I view as my famous friends, like, are in that category where they're facilitating something where individuals could have life trajectory change. I remember when I was in youth ministry, you did youth ministry too. Like, we had a band come in, and a girl in our youth group met her husband at that concert. And I constantly think, like, if we'd never had that concert, like, would they still meet, And it's weird what God does in that regard, which you're good at that. You're good at connecting people in that way.
Yeah. That's my weird side hobby. It's been a while, but I've set up 5 marriages. So people know when they're around me, like, if and people will come to me, they're like, hey, I heard you can find me a spouse, and they'll ask me, yeah, if you hang out with me for more than like 10 minutes, I'm gonna probably be like, hey, are you dating anybody? Let me put you in the Rolodex of people I like to match up. And so
just flipping around, going like, no, okay, this might work. Yeah, see what happens
Yesterday, we have a girl in our church. She's got 2 kids now, but her mom passed away a couple years ago from cancer, and she's been wanting to set her dad up. And one of the guys that planted one of the churches out of our church, his mom is a widow. And so all of a sudden, and they're both 62, and they both love Jesus, and they both have kids in our network. And I had to put them on a text. I said, guys, you're going to think I'm crazy, but I want to set up your 62-year-old widowed parents. And
you moved from teenagers into the older crowd.
Yeah, like, my mind's just always turning like that, and it's probably weird, but I'm like, man, I love love. I love my wife. I love living life with my best friend. And so I just want other people to have that. It's not, it's not rocket science, but yeah, I'm always trying to set people up like a weirdo.
That's fun. Which is kind of unusual, but what other like quirks are like absurd? Actually, the real question I want to ask is, what is like an unusual habit or an absurd thing that you love that's not setting people up?
I would say most people would tell you like they like chewing gum or they do it. I chew gum more than anyone I know.
Are you serious?
Yeah. I took it out. It's right here. I took it out to talk to you. And I was like, I get nervous when I don't have gum in my mouth. So I'm talking like,
do you preach with it?
When I wake up, yeah, I do.
Wow.
There's never, it's a miracle that there's not gum in my mouth, but sometimes I can be normal or pretend to be, but if I'm awake, I have gum in my mouth. And truthfully, because I chew gum so much, I used to chew my fingernails off, and the only way I could stop was to have gum in my mouth. And so now, because I always have gum in my mouth, I'm nervous to be, if I'm talking to someone, if I'm within 5 feet, in my mind, I'm like, oh, they can smell my breath. I never have bad breath because I'm always chewing gum, but I get freaked out about it. So
do you have a go-to? Like, what's your brand?
I'm a 5 gum peppermint cobalt. So I chew so much gum. Here's the pack. I'll let you see it there. It's on video. But I chew so much gum. It's got to be sugar free because so basically whatever sugar free gum gives me the best breath and lasts more than 5 minutes, I'm gonna rock with it. So I used to do extra polar ice, and then I had peppermint cobalt, and I'm like, that's better. Best idea always wins, and it's at the top of the mountain right now.
Do you have any others? That is kind of super quirky, but yeah.
Oh man. I mean, because of that, yeah, I've probably just become like a breath guy. Like I'm always telling my kids we're ready to leave the house, and Kristin's like, did you guys go to the bathroom? And I'm like, did you use mouthwash? Like, I'm like, I've worked for some leaders that had bad breath in the past, and I think there's nothing worse than that. So I'm probably a little weird on that one. I'm also passionate about my t-shirts and my thread counts. So I can people like just because as a pastor you're always screen printing stuff. Like I see the hoodie you've got on and stuff, and so I'll be like, oh, that's the Toltecs 0241, or that's the Comfort Colors long sleeve with the pocket or whatever. Like I can spot shirts. I'm pretty dorky when it comes to screen printing. So
Never underestimate the power of a tri-blend T-shirt. Like
exactly.
somebody gave me a
It's
cotton
them.
T-shirt the other day. I was like, "What is this garbage?"
Well, but that's one of the things that's making us old people. Tri blends are kind of moving down the line with us as old men. The cotton is back. So yeah, that's one of the ways recently I've had to lean into my own preferences and be like, all right, if I want to lead a church that has 20 somethings and they're wearing cotton, I got to be printing cotton shirts. But to the millennial in me,
Oh,
I'm dry heaving. I'm like, I don't want this cotton shirt.
because it's going to be gone in like
Yeah,
3 months. Just
I know that as soon as it hits the dryer, it's gonna have bacon collar and it's gonna look disgusting.
oh yeah, like they just crumble apart. Yeah. All
Yeah.
right. Change is constant. Growth often comes from adopting new beliefs, behaviors, habits, stuff like that. Share with us something you've incorporated in your life recently that has a positive impact in regards to belief, behavior, or habit that has improved your life.
Yeah, well, it's ironic. I didn't know I was talking about it there with the t-shirt thing, but I think it's part of a greater principle I've tried to have. I wouldn't say I'm old yet, but I would say I'm 42, and oops, finally said
Oh,
the
we
age.
got it. Yeah, it's
Uh,
out.
the beard's got some gray in it, and the hair's falling out. And I think for the first time in my life, I think most people are like, oh, he's a young, cool, energetic guy, but I'm losing that fast, and I'm looking around my church and seeing qualified leaders that are 2 decades younger than me. People, college graduates are now 2 decades younger than me, and so I am trying to just constantly ask questions and learn. So as dumb as it is, that T-shirt example I just gave, I don't want to be in the patterns and do things the way I've always done it. I came up in an era of ministry where I think, and this is not to get into theological discussion, but I think a lot of us philosophically were looking at some things like a guy like Andy Stanley did, and he was an innovator in some ways. He was doing things different than the way his dad's church had done them, and so for a while it was like, okay, that's how you do it. That's the best way. Well, as cultures and trends and generations change, the best way is a forever moving target. And so I am constantly trying to get to know young people and young leaders and ask how they think and why they think that way, why their generation thinks that way. The way they share their faith is different. The way they view community, the way they achieve community, the way that they dress, the way that they view dating, the way that they view social media and communication and advertising, those things are different. And so in this middle-aged phase of life, I'm trying to make sure that I don't fall off the conveyor belt at the end. I'm trying to at least mentally surround myself by young people and know why young people think the way they do, just so that I can, stay relevant, but in the name of reaching and leading multiple generations.
Yeah, there is something to be said about people who are naturally curious. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know if you can teach it. I don't know if you can teach somebody how to be curious because then questions just come across as awkward,
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
to somebody who is genuinely concerned and genuinely, which you're very much like, if you spend any time with you, there's going to be at least 4 or 5 questions that are natural curiosity, like coming out, like, "Hey, where'd you get that?" or "What'd you do?" or and it's not because you're questioning to like put you in a corner or
Yeah.
make you appear dumb. It's man, I'm genuinely curious. Like, how did you get there?
Yeah.
which is fantastic. What advice would you give to somebody about to, speaking of, the younger generation, about to go into the real world? So experience or insights or advice that you have to somebody kind of in the real world today. What would be your number one thing that you would say in regards to advice for them?
Man, I think I'm not gonna lie. The way you sized me up at the beginning of this, you said something like, I've just kind of made slow progress, and I think what is
Small
it?
steps.
Slow, yeah, small steps, or even I've heard slow obedience in the same direction, or long obedience in the same direction. I think is often attributed to Eugene Peterson. I think he wrote a book. I think I would probably tell a lot of young people the same thing. It seems to be that we're getting in a world where less and less you're going to be successful on accident. You might be the person that accidentally blows up as a YouTube star, but I think like for my kids now, you're not going to build a career on accident, and you're not going to save enough money to buy a house on accident, and you're not going to be debt free on accident. And so I think the thing I'm trying to impart to my kids and impart to people that I have impact with is just to have a plan and exercise that plan with wisdom. The Bible speaks to most things, and so it's not rocket science to say, all right, what does Scripture say about my finances? What does Scripture say about building a family and having kids and a marriage and ministry involvement and loving the local church? And I think it's just a matter of having a plan and having an approach, and then long obedience in the same direction, I think is how you build a life. When you've been married 1 year, you're like, man, I don't have this figured out. But somewhere around 20 years, you're like, all right, we got a good thing going here. And when you're a new parent, you don't have it figured out. But one day you look up and they're in high school and you think, hey, my kids aren't total losers, and they're respectful and nice, and maybe we got a good thing going here. And same with our church. I mean, I'm intimidated every day by my job, but I also look back and think like, man, God's changing people's lives, and God's done some amazing things here, and I'm blessed to be a part of it. And so, yeah, I think just, building a plan with wisdom and then staying committed to the plan and working the plan, is what I would tell people in almost every discipline or every area of their life.
What about advice people should ignore? Like any common advice or beliefs that you think people should ignore or question?
Oh, wow. I mean, not to be too general, but I'm regularly blown away how often well-intentioned evangelical people will give advice that just flies in the face of Scripture. Like I'll look at people. They're like, yeah, I'm going to go to fill in the blank college. It's like, oh, I thought that college was like 70,000 a year. They're like, yeah, it is. And I'm thinking like, okay, well, maybe go reread Proverbs and tell me where God wants you to be $250,000 in debt so you can have a psychology degree, and I obviously I sound kind of opinionated as I say that, but I think like sometimes people are just like, just not listening to what God wants from what Scripture says. I'll talk to people all the time. They're like, yeah, I'm kind of dating this person. I'm like, oh, I didn't think they knew Jesus. And they're like, well, it's casual. And I'm like, oh, so dating is casual to you, and they don't know Jesus, and it's just some things where I'm like, man, I think Scripture's pretty clear, and that's not to judge people, it's not to hate on anybody, but these are the same things I would impart to my kids. Like, I just think sometimes people are chasing the American dream or chasing this comfortable thing, and sometimes you can do that in a way that's insulated inside of suburbia, where we still pretend it's Christian or because it's still American or something. And it's just like, man, that doesn't feel like wisdom. It doesn't feel like God's wisdom. Like if we believe wisdom exists, then there's a best way to do something. There's a way to walk toward that with some clarity. And so, yeah, I would just say, like, I think people need to beware of the things they're doing that are probably not going to get them killed, but are kind of unbiblical and seem to be not a great way to build a foundation for life.
I like how you approach that with a question, like instead of saying, man, that's dumb, like, where do you see this at, or where did you get that from, which is a huge question, asking people like, where's that come from, where did you get that, or that worldview, for lack of a better term, about that thing.
And sometimes people are just living what's been passed on to them. I met with a couple the other day, and they were like, yeah, we're thinking we're going to move in together. And I just started leaning into that and asking questions. And I realized they were new believers. Their parents, didn't really pass a faith on them. They both happened to find Jesus, be baptized in college. No one had ever mention to them that maybe living together
Isn't a
wasn't
good
God,
idea. Yeah.
what was a bad idea, and was, not even, we can talk Bible, but we can also just talk about, you can look at the research, and those people are more likely to get divorced and have some things happen. And when I said that to them, they were genuinely grateful. They were like,
Mm.
we never knew that. Like, we didn't, they were like, man, we're so glad you're, helping us see what God's design is. And so, yeah, it's not to judge anybody. Sometimes people, like I said, I think I had a mom and dad that were pretty wise, and so they passed on some wisdom. And yeah, some people didn't know their mom or their dad, or had a bad relationship with them, or their parents were in debt up to their eyeballs. And so some of these things aren't just automatically known. Yeah, it's like maybe you can pass it on in humility, and try to change the trajectory of what they're doing.
With that said, what are some bad recommendations you hear often in your profession area of expertise? Like, is there anything that comes up where you're like, man, that's not a good. I mean, I know you talked. The question is kind of partnered off the last question, because we talked about advice people should ignore, but moving into like bad recommendations you hear for your specific profession and what you do.
You mean like if someone wants to go into my profession?
It could be, yeah. Like, just, I mean, it kind of depends on what you do, but there are either bad recommendations or there's bad practices. So to give you kind of like a springboard off that, like, I'll just give you kind of like a sliver from my world, is like, I hear a lot of times, or I see a lot of times where people are like, you should go into the ministry. And I'm like, no, you shouldn't. Like that, you should be a CEO of a giant company because you have those things. And I hear people sometimes like whispering into people's ears things where I'm going, no, like, don't do that, or whatever the case is. So yeah, it's a bad recommendation.
Yeah, I think I see that. I think where my mind went, honestly, just in shepherding a lot of people's lives and seeing a lot of American suburban families, I'm blown away by how often people feel seasons of trauma or busyness or hurt, and they'll say things like, "Hey, we're going to take a step back from," and it's like their kids are playing 2 sports at a time and 3 soccer leagues, and they're like, "Hey, we're going to take a step back from our small group." And I'm thinking like, man, I don't know. That's, you're busy. I'm sure you're busy, and I'm sure you're feeling it. But I think often people are cutting the wrong things out of their life. They're cutting out community. They're cutting out people speaking into their life, people pouring in their life. They're cutting out serving. Sometimes it's like, hey, we need to make some upgrades to the house, and so we're gonna step back what we're giving to the church. And again, it's not in a state of judgment, but I think that all too often, if you had a toothache, you wouldn't cut your arm off. And so I think sometimes people feel this tension and feel this busyness or feel this weight, and they eliminate the thing that they've seen other people cut out, or they eliminate the thing that it's like, well, that's the one that is expendable. And I think sometimes, from my view, and I understand people are going to look at that and be like, well, a pastor's supposed to say that, or he gets his salary from people giving. But I've seen it time and time again. I've seen people that take a step back completely from church, and it changes their life, and it changes their heart, and it changes their family. And so, yeah, I just think often people are, they feel crowded in their life, and they eliminate the wrong things, the things that don't matter, and the things that aren't eternal, are the things that should probably be scaled and looked at. And people make that mistake often.
Would your dad have a quote on that?
He probably does. My dad's got a quote on everything.
He comes out of nowhere. Quote. He's like, as a matter of fact, I do.
No, his favorite quote, he loves to just walk up to people and say, hey, do you have that $20 you owe me? So that's the quote. People have handed him 20s and like, I'm just kidding. But maybe just a quote we all want to say in our lives just to get more money. But he would say that. Like, he would often tell us that. He's, I remember him waking us up on Saturday mornings to go, clean out gutters for widows in our church, and I'm like rubbing the cobwebs out of my eyes, and I'm mad that we're out of, it's 90 degrees in the summer. And he would say, if something matters to God, it should matter to us. So that's one I think of often that applies to just about everything. But, it's like if community matters to God, it matters to us. If the poor and disenfranchised matter to God, it should matter to us. And same thing. If being part of the local church, if Jesus gave his life for his bride, then we should probably care about that too. So yeah, we'll shout out Ron Artrip on that one too.
Boundaries and priorities, obviously super important. What about you, Mark? Like, what have you become better at saying no to in the last 5 years?
Whew. Well, many, many things. I mentioned I'm someone that loves. I just love people. And because of that, I want people to like me. I want to win people over. I want to have influence and be friends with everybody. And I think probably the first 30 years of my life, without knowing it, was probably a sprint to just meet as many people as I could. Knew my high school, knew the next high school over, knew the next sister church over, knew their youth group, my youth group, go on a ministry trip, go to college, friends, their friends, Facebook, move to a new city. And I finally got to a point that, I don't know, sometime in this church planning process where I'm like, oh, I know enough people now that it could be overwhelming, just the opportunities and the contacts and the desire to, I want to go to everyone's thing and be a part of everyone's thing and stay in touch with every person and have them like me. And almost realizing that, like, no, that can be an idol. Like, if I'm working for the approval of other people, then I've eliminated needing God's approval. And so I've just had to learn to say no to good things. I can't go to every grad party. I can't go to every guy's weekend. I can't go to someone in my church's 10-year-old softball game that they invited me to, and I want to be the pastor that shows up. But you get enough of those games and you can't do that. I can't be in every pastor's network. I can't drive home a couple hours and go to every family thing. I've just had to realize that I'm finite. It's one of the things that came out of the ruthless elimination. Like, if I'm a finite being, then I have finite things I can do. I can't do everything and be everything to everyone at all times, or I'll burn out and be empty. And so I've had to just learn to say no and say, all right, if Jesus is my priority, he gets my time. And if my wife is a priority, she gets my time. And if my kids are a priority, they get my time. And if, our church is set up that I pour into our elders, who pour into shepherds, who pour into everyone else, I need to spend my time with our elders, and I need to spend my time with people that are leading our small groups, and I need to spend my time with our staff. And I'll have friendships and people I click with and hobbies, but I've had to be selective and realize that when I say yes to everything, I'm inadvertently saying no to focus and no to success. And so I've had to say no up front, and realize I've got to say no to a lot of things to focus on things that matter and things that are important.
It sounds extremely frustrating and fulfilling to find out you're human.
Yeah, exactly. It was, or to find out that you can't just keep making a million friends every year and still be a good friend. If you have a million friends, you have no friends.
Yeah, so. Yeah. What about when you feel overwhelmed or unfocused? What do you do?
A couple of things.
By the way, for those of you who can't see, Mark has put the gum back in his mouth. I just want to bring that back out to the surface.
Well, because I was trying to act like I'm cooler than I am, and I thought, man, I already threw myself under the bus. Let's get that good breath back. So the gum is in, and I feel better already.
Yeah. So if the interview feels like it's going a lot better, you'll know why.
Yeah. No, man, I think one of the things that I do when I'm just, in a bad spot, I love sleep. And as I say that, I'm almost embarrassed to tell people how much I love sleep, because I think there's this narrative of like, man, go to bed at 1, get up at 4, grind. I'm doing my devotions at 6. And I love sleep. Like I almost always get 8 hours of sleep, and people think I'm insane. I've gone on less. There was never a night in college that I pulled an all-nighter. The least amount of sleep I ever got in college was 4 hours.
Do you take naps?
Yeah, I take naps. But honestly, if I take a nap, then I can't fall asleep. So because my naps are 4 and 5 hours. So I just
if you go down, you're going down for a while.
Yeah. So like during the winter, usually like one night a week, like I'm in bed at 8, and I think I'm like, oh man, I'm missing out on what my kids are doing. But I just need sleep. Like, I found out most of the time, if I'm having a bad day and I'm like, oh, I'm a terrible pastor, God can't use me, it's like I don't need to overthink it. I just need a nap, And so I take naps. That sounds funny, but like I sleep. Another thing I do, I work out. I've found the longer I'm in this job, I'm just aware that this job is not normal. Right. And so, I think you're a guy that works out at like 5 a.m. and I do that sometimes. You got to structure your day, but I've found that usually I need to burn off a little steam before I go home. I don't want to take some of the stress of counseling and leading and just different things about my personality. I don't want to take that right home to my kids. And so I'm the guy that'll come to the office at 5 a.m. so that I can go work out at 2 or 3.
Sure.
And do an hour of cardio before I get home and be tired. So I sleep, I work out. Another one is I get out in nature. I grew up, like I said, in a cornfield in the country where we were just always outside growing up. And I always glamorized the city. And so when I got to the Columbus area, I'm like, yeah, big city. And I started to realize a few
Which
years
you're
in.
not in the city.
No, we're not. We're in suburban. But compared to where I grew up, my parents just got cable television. Cable wasn't to their house. They just ran it to their house like
Yeah.
5 years ago. I'm talking like
Our
we
younger
were on
generation's like, what's cable? What is that?
exactly. Yeah. But I'm talking like we were out there. You know what I mean? In the summer, there's cornfields on three sides of my parents' house and cows across the road. So like we were out there.
Yeah.
And so I grew up in nature, but didn't even really realize it, you know. So you'd always meet these people like, oh, they're going backpacking at Glacier National Park, and I didn't think I was that guy. But I'm like, man, I do need to get out and get on. I have a bike I like to ride, not a cool bike like you, just a pedal bike. You know, we have bike trails here that go like all over Ohio, and so I'll ride down to Cedarville and back, or I'll go on a hike or go on a run, or I'll drive down to Hocking Hills and go hiking. If I'm not in nature every so often, I'm probably losing my mind a little bit, I've realized. So I got to get out and
Hocking Hills is gorgeous. Like,
yeah,
it's there is like those little spots. I think people forget too, like how many places in America are surrounded by 4 cornfields. There's tons of them out there. Yeah, for sure. All right, last question is, as we kind of land the plane, what's the one thing people never ask you, but you wish they would?
Ooh, I wish I've mentioned this. Nobody can see it, but I'm kind of a guy that's losing my hair. It's falling out here. It's done, and I wish that people would ask me. I believe there's kind of an etiquette you need to follow as a balding American male. And I think that people don't think of that enough. Like I don't think it's your choice what to do with your hair. If you have
So what is it? What's the etiquette?
So if you have a bald spot in the back, your head should be buzzed. If you have a receding hairline, not a forehead, they call it a 5-head, your head should be buzzed. If your hair is thinning, your hair should be buzzed. I regularly run into guys because I feel like I'm running the play I'm dealing with the hand that's been dealt to me. I buzz my head. I keep it short. I'll talk to guys all the time that are balder than I am, but they keep their hair 6 inches long and they're doing a version of the comb over. And they'll make a joke about me being bald, and I just want to come at them and be like, yeah, that's the pot calling the kettle black, you know. But like, I think more people should be buzzing their head. Like if you're still like pushing everything to the center with some gel, or you're doing a version of the comb over, or you're fluffing it up so it looks like this, more people need to shave and buzz their head. And if they're ever wondering, like, can people tell that I'm bald? We're all judging you, and you should buzz your head.
Either you gained significant credibility or you lost all of it in one sentence. Like,
So there's that. That's one, and then I got 2 for you actually, because there's nothing. I'm not good at a lot of things, but I'm good at being bald, and I'm good at being a pale redhead. Like it's just in my DNA, you know. So if you ever meet someone that has sunburn, and you're like, what should I do about this sunburn? If you talk to tan people, they'll always tell you to use aloe vera, and that's a wives' tale lie. It's like putting water on sunburn; it does nothing. There's some stuff called solar cane that is like actual burn ointment. You get a sunburn, you put that or some high-powered cortisone cream, or get in a first aid kit and put on, like they make things. You know, if you get actually burnt by a fire, those are the things that are really built for burn. Put those on your sunburn and let that change your life. You know, so.
I remember solar cane from when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Solar cane's a real thing.
Yeah, but people sleep on it or don't know about it because everyone's grandma is like, oh, I got an aloe vera plant. Let me put that on you. And that grandma is usually someone that is tan. And you know how it is with redheads. Like there's never a redhead in the family, and all of a sudden one of the kids is redhead, and no one knows where it came from or how to help them. And so you're always asking your tan friends, like, what do I do about this sunburn? And that's like they don't know. So
does your wife walk around with like solar cane in her purse? Because both your kids are redhead. I mean, 2 of your kids are redhead.
Yeah, my son's a redhead. Kristin, ironically, can tan, and it gets better as you get older. You're less redheaded. But yeah, it's on the vacation packing list. Like, I'm afraid to go far away from home and not have solar cane because you get burnt and it's gonna ruin your week, you know.
That's so funny you brought that up because like immediately when you said it, I could feel it on my skin. Like of like mom like spraying that on my skin, you know, because it cools really fast. It's got, and just for the record, I think it has aloe vera in it, but I could be wrong.
Well, it might, but it's got a lot of other stuff, and like just aloe vera is like not enough. So
you need more. If you're a redhead, you need a lot more.
Or even if you're not a redhead, there's a lot of other pale people out there too that they get burnt once a decade and don't know what to do. So I have a PhD in it, and I want to help the people out.
I'm looking at the inactive ingredients right now of it, like propane's in solar cane.
Hey, it works. It works.
Like it's an inactive ingredient, but we threw it in there anyway because
just in case.
in case you want to light yourself on fire. Good grief. Oh man. All right, Mark Artrip, thank you so much for sharing your insights, experiences, man. Yeah, what a pleasure to be able to call you a friend. And before we wrap up, anything else you want to share with listeners? Any projects you're currently working on or that you'd like to mention?
Man, the only thing I would mention is, we planted our church going on 13 years ago here, and we want to be a church that plants churches. So if we've kind of got a small network going here in Columbus, and if someone that's listening to this would ever want to plant a church, would be interested in doing a residency with us, or would know someone that wants to plant a church, I would love to network and talk to anybody that wants to do that. You can go to movementchurches.org and check out some of the opportunities we're looking at in the Central Ohio area. In the Columbus area, the last half of 2023, Columbus was the fastest growing city in America. God's doing some amazing stuff here spiritually, but just in the growth of the city, and we want to keep up with planting churches in this area. So I always love to meet people interested in planting churches.
So you have two websites, and you have Movement Church, which is your church, and then you have Movement Churches.
Yeah, so movementcolumbus.com is the one for us, and then kind of the network we're doing. We got movementchurches.org, and that's just we don't talk about that a lot unless someone's specifically in that church plant lane. But I just thought I'd
Is that you? Did you start that?
Yeah, it's just kind of the churches we've started out of our network, and we get all those guys together for date nights and kind of keep them encouraged and keep them in the game. And we do a yearly retreat, and so we don't own those churches. We're all autonomous churches, but we like to, help encourage them and keep them moving and keep them strong and healthy. So
that's fascinating.
And hopefully someday, that could be multiple networks. It doesn't need to be us, but we're just, getting it going now and getting the flywheel moving. So
yeah, fantastic. To our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode. You can go back and do a deep dive on some of our previous episodes, listening to some other people who have just some really good information and content. Remember, it is important to subscribe, rate, review, all of those things. And if you found this beneficial, please click the share button, send it, text message, email. Carrier pigeon also works too, like whatever you need to do to get the word out. But stay tuned. We got some more people coming up for sure in regards to inspiring conversations. Just some remarkable individuals doing some fantastic things like Mark. Until next time, take care, and we'll talk to you soon.